I hate clock. Just look at my WCA profile for proof. But what if I spend a full week practicing clock, getting mentorship from a world record holder, and doing hundreds of solves? How fast could I get? I guess we'll find out. But first, let's see how good I am right now. Yeah, not very good. So over day 0, I need a plan. First off, my clock sucks. So I went to the cubicle and got a new one. The next thing I have to fix up is my method. Currently, I'm just using the beginner's method where I solve one piece at a time. The method itself is not bad and there's a lot of top solvers that use it, but I do want to use a different one. One method I looked into is one where you memorize one clock from the back row, and if you do that move with the first move, you won't get any more bottom moves, which I suck at. But then I started experimenting with other methods that don't move the bottom layer at all. And that's where I learned about 7 simo flip. So if you know clock, you heard a lot about 7 simo, but how does it really work? Well, the clock has 14 pieces. There's 4 corners and 10 of these edges. 5 on one side, 5 on the other. Since there's 14 total pieces to solve, you need 14 moves. The idea of 7 simo is that if you have one pin up on one side and one pin down on the other side, you can turn both of these dials at the same time. This allows you to pretty much do 2 moves at once. And if you do these simultaneous moves in a clever way, you can cut down 14 moves into 7 moves. Hence, 7 simo. So for day 0, I'll just be learning this new method, 7 simo flip, which in the name has one flip in the solve, but eliminates all bottom moves. To show how this method works, I'll give you a quick example solve. I'm going to have to memorize 4 numbers. First off, this one to this one, that's a 5. We'll apply that 5 to this one, which goes here. Then this one to this imaginary one, which is 4. That's the first number. Second number is this one to this one, which is -2. Third number is this one to this one, which is 0. The next number, do this one to this one, which is -1. Apply that to here, and do this one to this one, which is 6. So we have 4, -2, 0, 6. So here's how we execute. Do 4 here, -2 here, do 0 here, while solving these two. Match up this 2 by 2, and then take note of this to here, which is 3. Next we'll flip it over. We have 6 from before, so we'll do 6 here, and then 3 for this one. Solve these two while also solving these two. Make a 2 by 2 block, and then solve everything to 12. So now that we learned the method, let's start with day 1, practicing the method. With my first solves, I wrote down the memorization on a piece of paper. Once I got good at this, I started to just memorize the numbers by repeating them over and over again. But there was a problem. 4, -3, -4, 5, 4. Negatives were so hard to memorize because the word took too long to say. So I decided to convert my numbers into letters, like a lot of other top clock solvers. For the numbers 1 through 5, I would use A through E. For 0, I would use the letter O. For negative numbers, most clock solvers make these letters as well, but it was a bit too hard for me, so I just kept them as numbers. So here's my final code, which made my memorization much easier. With just a bit of practice, it was pretty easy to inspect and memorize everything. At the end of day 1, I was getting some pretty decent times that were not DNFs, and even a sub 20. For day 2, now that I can solve the clock with the correct method, I need to find out how to get faster. So I hopped on a call with Tommy Cherry, the world record holder and world champion for clock. He showed me 3 key things I can do to get faster. The first one had to do with inspection. One thing that Tommy mentioned in the interview is that during inspection, you want to try to hold the clock in the optimal position to make it as easy of a solve as possible. Right now, what I do is I just look at the pins. I try to put the pin down on the top right. That way, I can start the solve immediately without touching the pins. But the pins aren't that important, it's more of the clocks. Here's what I figured out. Anything on this vertical line that's solved is always good. This does not apply for horizontal lines, only for vertical lines. And this applies for both sides. Other than lines, edges across from each other that are solved are also good. Something like this would also skip a step for me. This is also true if it's on the bottom right. So it has to be top left or bottom right. It can't be top right or bottom left. And this applies for both sides. So knowing this information, I can always look at the scramble and see how I can skip steps. For example, for this one, holding something like this vertically would definitely skip a step. And holding these 2 edges on the top left or bottom right in any direction would also skip a step. Sometimes I'll get unlucky and there pretty much are no pieces that are solved, but I could still choose the best option. For example here, none of the pieces on this vertical line are solved, but they're all pretty close to each other. So some of these pieces would all be pretty small moves, which is always good. So with this new strategy, I can get a lot luckier skipping steps, and if not skip, get some pretty easy steps. After learning this trick, it was back to a ton of practice. Even though I felt like I was saving more moves, my times weren't getting that much faster. And I was still getting used to this new method. But day 3 was pretty exciting because in the afternoon, I got a package from the cubicle. Okay, that's so much better than my Lingao. With this new clock that was so much better, I was so much more motivated to practice, and my times instantly went down. There were so many problems with my old clock, like the pins falling and some of the hands of the clock not being straight, but this new clock fixed pretty much everything. As a result, I was getting a lot of great times. But for day 4, I noticed my clock was still not perfect. When I tried other people's clocks at competitions, they were usually really fast, but mine wasn't that fast. So I decided to take it apart and lubricate it. Instead of lubing the gears, you actually lube the faces by putting lube on a paper towel and wiping it on the faces. At first, I thought this was pretty strange, but the result was a much faster clock, and I was even more motivated to practice with this newly set up clock. In addition to setting up my clock, there was one more thing I wanted to work on. So one thing I noticed is that this method is called 7 simo, but I'm not really doing simultaneous moves. A lot of the times I'm just doing one move on one hand, and then doing the other move on the other hand, when I should be doing them both at the same time. Now even Tommy Cherry doesn't do this all the time, but for the most part, I should be trying to do simultaneous moves. So these first few moves are pretty hard, but I should definitely be doing simultaneous moves for this last move, which is creating this 2x2 block. This should be pretty easy to do at the same time. And then for this side, same thing. For this 2x2 block, I should be trying to do it at the same time, like this. For the final step, I bring everything to 12, and this is also another step I can do both moves at the same time, I think. So for at least those 3 steps, I want to do them simultaneously. And I think by doing that, I will save quite a bit of time. From there, it was just a ton of solves, until I got to this one solve. I finally broke the sub 10 barrier, and it was using 7 simo, which I was pretty proud of. In just a few days, it seems like I'm better already at 7 simo than my old beginner's method. To prove this, I did a solve with the beginner's method. And I accidentally got overall PB. There's still some work to be done for day 5. For day 5, I'm focusing on one thing, my eyes. Now it might sound pretty weird, but I'll be focusing on 3 things, and here's what they are. The first thing is visualization. Now usually in my solves, for the first few moves, I'm pretty much just counting the clicks when I turn the dial. So if I have to do a -5 here, I'll just count the clicks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's so inefficient. So what I'm doing now is visualizing where it should go, and then doing it in one smooth motion. So -5, this dial should end up at this bottom 6 o'clock. So instead of counting 5 times, I could just move this dial to this dot. This also means I could do my first few moves simultaneously. For example, if this is like a -2 and this is a -3, I'd visualize this to go to the 12 o'clock and this to go to the 6 o'clock. And I could do that simultaneously, like this. Next, I'm going to try to look ahead a bit more. That means while I'm doing these simultaneous moves, if I can, try to look ahead to the next move I can be doing. Now this is going to be pretty hard because I'm keeping track of a lot of numbers and it'll be hard to focus on that, but if I can look ahead to the next step as much as possible, I'll be reducing a lot of pauses. The last thing is another thing that Tommy mentioned.
Try to minimize your eye movement.
Now at first I didn't really know what this meant, but I tried to think about it a bit more and it makes a lot more sense. If you move your eyes around the clock a lot, you're wasting quite a lot of time. So you want to keep your eyes in a specific region of the clock. So what I'm trying to do is focus on the right side of the clock pretty much at all times, even when I flip the clock. And one way I do this is by using peripheral vision. So even if your eyes focus on this top right clock, you can see this bottom left clock moving in the corner of your eye. So here's one step where peripheral vision is pretty helpful. This is the 4th step. I need to match these 2 corners and these 2 edges. Normally if I had to do this, I have to move my eyes all over the puzzle, which is so much work. But instead I can just focus my eyes on these 2 and then do these 2 corners from peripheral vision. So my eyes are focused here, solve these 2, while bringing this one slowly close to this one. All of that time my eyes are focused on these 2, but I also solved these 2. So this tip helps me reduce pauses and looking around the cube way too much. With these new techniques, I started to practice a lot more, and instantly I was seeing much better results. I could pretty confidently say that I was averaging sub 10. 8-second solves were becoming more and more common, and even 7s seemed in reach. For day 6, I realized I need more specific practice on my method, 7 simo flip. So I started to analyze solves of the top solvers using this method, one of them being Jaden Lin. So after studying some solves, I learned a few small tricks. First off is the way you do the pins. So usually what I do is put this down, and then when I flip it, and turn these two. But what I realized you could do is you could do this, and then while you're flipping it, turn these pins, which is such a smart idea, doing the pins while flipping the cube. Another thing I noticed is that my flip is really slow. I'm taking up a lot of time to flip when I should be like doing it pretty fast. I also noticed that my turning is sometimes a bit too slow. I should be a bit faster and more confident with my turns. This is especially with larger turns. Sometimes when I have to do like a 6, I would do it in a few motions to get it right, when ideally I should do it in one motion like that. So main takeaways for the flip, do it fast with this new trick, and for the turning, also just do it fast in one motion. With those techniques and the idea in my head of just turning faster, I surprisingly improved quite a bit. At this point I was averaging almost sub 9 and even had a sub 8 average, so my final goal was to get a sub 7 single. This solve was pretty disappointing because it was a 5 simo solve and one of the most lucky scrambles I ever got. But there was still one day for me to try to get a sub 7 single. For this day, the only advice I took was the final piece of advice that Tommy gave.
I guess I'll just keep it simple and say do a lot of solves.
So let's just do a lot of solves. With me getting a sub 7 single, I felt like that was a pretty good ending for that day. And a pretty nice ending for 7 days with Clock. Clock went from an event that I hated to one I found pretty enjoyable, honestly. Right now I'm still improving, and I'm actually pretty excited for my next competition with this event. So thanks for watching, and comment the next event you want me to practice for 7 days.